We're moments away from talking to Alan Adkisson. Alan is the founder of the Probiotic Farmers Alliance and the maven who is responsible for the introduction and implementation and rediscovery of probiotic growing. And then he implemented that. Alan converted cannabis growers from using bottled nutrients to not. That's a miracle. And so again, we are talking to an extremely important person in the cannabis industry, high profile, well known, well respected. And again, God knows why Alan wants to talk to little old Dan. Just like his mate Kevin Jodrey, these guys are levels above most people in any industry. And I want to expose that. You know, I want to show the world that from day one, these guys, even before legalization, these guys were really, you know, they were good guys. They had the right mindset, and I want to prove to the world that cannabis people are different. We're going to start this new industry right, on the right foot, with the right leaders. Now we're going to talk to Alan Adkisson. What an honor it is to talk to you, Alan. You have, through mushroom tripping with Eddy Lep, rediscovered an ancient growing method that was used for possibly the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You have then created a social network group of 30,000 plus to then test, implement, and switch to that grow method. Dude, it's like coming up with a new fucking genre of music.
Okay, I think Kid Rock said it very well in one of his albums when he said, you know, when it's real, you know, you can feel it. I know you know this. If I was full of shit, they would never allow me to get away with saying the proof is in the smoke. When you smoke, these herbs grown in symbiosis with these microbes and with a high nutrient density level, it's different. It's far different. The high lasts maybe 3 to 5 hours rather than just an hour. Fermented food is normally way more nutritious for you. Certain things are unlocked during the lactic acid bacteria fermentation.
Let's start at the beginning. What's probiotic farming?
Probiotic farming is when you are farming in symbiosis with probiotics that are capable of using the competitive law of exclusion. So we don't think in probiotic farming about how we can poison off different microbes, fusarium and things like that, powdery mildew. We think about what in nature automatically outcompetes that, and we make sure we include those prebiotics and those microbes in our farming.
What an interesting way to approach a problem. It's like you're using love instead of hate, right?
I find it's funny that you used the word love, because I think that that's what lactic acid bacteria they install. They kind of work as an empathogen, reinstalling love and empathy into an animal or a plant. These bacteria, if we look them up as far as being a medical treatment for PTSD, we find that these same bacteria, these probiotics, are used to treat PTSD. How? Somehow they're reinstalling empathy, which is outcompeting the PTSD. Anytime you want to create a soldier, you're gonna have to ask that soldier to kill for you. So you had to create a psychopath, or at least a pseudo-sociopath, to follow your orders. How do you get that out of them once their time is done in the military? You know, the Romans seemed like what they did is when they brought a lot of these soldiers home, they were using them in conjunction with these microbes to do these solid state fermentations, and literally these microbes were sinking in. So it wasn't just the labor, you know, that was calming down the soldier. It was these microbes that kept these products that they were working with in a state of regeneration, you know, through fermentation, and it sinks into them. And I have yet to see anyone who comes and works with these materials for any length of time leave in the same frame of mind. Also, you know, like, I'm an old bouncer. I've never seen anyone that I choked out and then woke up and was nice to wake up in the same frame of mind. It's a reset.
That was some deep stuff. From what you're telling me, due to competitive exclusion and by farming with love, by adding microbes rather than taking, it has a symbiotic effect on the human who is part of that process. They seem to be surrounding themselves by these microbes, and by those microbes becoming attached to the human, the competitive exclusion works, and maybe that bad energy, you know, from the negative post-traumatic stress syndrome, maybe that bad energy is actually just a lot to do with microbes. Just like a pathogen is to a plant, maybe that's what a psychological pathogen is to the human.
You know, I think, okay, in agriculture, I believe what it does is the probiotics go in and they become like a bacterial mycelium, and that mycelial mat, it acts as a filter and an intelligent delivery device. Kevin Jodrey and I talked in depth about this, and he had some scientists who sent him some cannabis plants that were infected with tomato mosaic virus. Do not get that confused with tobacco mosaic virus.
Right.
That's the sticking point. TMV, but tomato, not tobacco. And they sent him these plants that were infected, and this is normally a death sentence for these plants. But because the Streptomyces mycelium was there, the same Streptomyces that we use synthesized to create antibiotics, you know, to outcompete pathogens, when it's there in its natural form, and it's doing the delivery of the food, and it's bolstering the plant's immune system, I think in effect, it might be doing epigenetic gene therapy. I talk to a lot of the top breeders in our industry. We talk about the same thing. Many of us have stumbled upon the fact that if we feed our mother plants very, very lightly, almost on the edge of starvation, sometimes the seeds that come from that stack on much more weight.
You've created a movement. Would you say that's fair?
God, I hope so.
Yeah, man.
You know, they tricked us into using these fucking fertilizers that demineralize our soils and ruin our creeks, and now they want to use regulation to take the right to farm away from us, just at a point when our farming styles could be the solution to the pollution. Their time has come. They're done. They're going to be sued if they want to stick with the synthetic fertilizers by everyone downhill or sharing the same watershed with them, because everyone downhill or sharing the same watershed with them has legal standing. And just like we're on the cutting edge in farming, we're on the cutting edge when it comes to using the court system for ourselves. Every one of us can name some little program where a highway wanted to come through your area, but somebody sued on behalf of a newt or a trout or something, and it stopped that government project right in its tracks. Well, you know what? When that big corporate grow comes to your neighborhood, man, sue them. And you know what? You're not being a snitch, because someone's being hurt, and people are being hurt. And that's the difference between a snitch and someone doing the right thing. Stand up for nature, stand up for yourself, and stand up for your neighbors. And you know what? Provide them with the solution. Don't just be a guy who sues people to take the money. Sue them, but provide them with a solution that is financially, you know, possible. Provide them with products like Gro-Kashi that we or you make in your own region. Teach them about how nutrient density only comes through, high nutrient density levels only come through organic, regenerative, probiotic type of growing. In a organic situation, everything's breaking down on the topsoil and is being delivered by healthy soil microbiology.
Now, can I just pause? The word organic, you mean natural, not the corporate label of organic on a nutrient bottle. Is that correct, Alan?
I should stop saying organic because it's been so bastardized.
I know.
Every year more and more. One thing I'd like to tell you is the difference between growing in living soil, doing the regenerative farming, The difference between regenerative farming, organic farming, and what I call probiotically farmed. You could farm with probiotics and be a probiotic farmer, okay? But if you want to take it to the next level and farm probiotically, you have to bring in the sub-irrigated planter technology. Because with sub-irrigated planter technology, we're not cutting the earth. We're going to use a third of the water that we would with typically a 30% yield increase. And the runoff from those boxes every day is going to remineralize and bioremediate what's underneath of that box. So we're not depending on having good soil. We could grow on a rocky hillside anywhere or a rooftop. Imagine if the runoff from your garden on your rooftop of your building, you were given something like carbon tax credits toward your property taxes on that building because you helped completely bioremediate the local sewer system.
So let's just get that straight. My mates that are growing in bottled nutrient, hydroponic, cocoa, run to waste, flood, it doesn't matter, DWC, there's always a large quantity of water filled with shit that's got to be gotten rid of, correct? That hurts Mother Nature, correct? Fact, like it's just going to, yeah?
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the stuff but all probiotic farming, natural farming, that actually helps, isn't it? Doesn't it?
Yeah, it's beneficial. The runoff from our endeavor can be scientifically tested in 2 or 3 different ways and prove that you and your farm are beneficial. Here's how it works with probiotic farming. When you're using a sub-irrigated planter, you're saving 2/3 of the water that you normally would use, okay? So what you're going to want to do, your reservoir is basically full of this fairly active fermentation. So if I went to my reservoir and it took me 9 seconds top watering through the feed tube for overflow to occur, I would continue to a count of 12. Now, reason being, I know that what runs out of the box is beneficial onto the ground, so I have saved 1/3 of my 2/3 savings for remediation and for that purpose, and I've freshened up that reservoir. So that spark of life that comes from an active fermentation is occurring under the plant. Now, the other huge reason for probiotic farming and probiotically farmed materials is because our frogs and our salamanders and so many of our little animals, this box becomes a refuge. These same microbes that we use in shrimp farming and aquaculture are in that reservoir. So it draws almost every frog around to it. You'll start watering boxes one day, and every time you go to water a box, a frog will come out of the tube. So you're helping these frogs immensely. You're helping the bees too, because they often come to where the overflow occurred and get a drink.
What would you say to convince me to do probiotic, Alan?
I would say the same things that I said to my friends back when we were growing things like Acapulco Gold and brown strains, that the industry is changing, and if you don't change with the industry, you're done. You're just like the grower who stayed with the brown weed when we went to the green bud. If you want to stay in this industry, you're going to have to stay and make moves with the industry. And I would give the same advice that I would have given to my friends that were buying or growing coffee when fair trade came along. You better get on board. We have slavery in cannabis. I hope you know this.
Tell me more.
Well, we have these cartel grows, some of them within a couple rocks throws of where I'm sitting right now. Do you think those guys are sharing in the profits from that? Or do you think that they're here working because their families are threatened back home?
How is the black market still able to thrive?
Well, because the guys normally aren't growing on their own land, number one, so that the cartel's not filing a discharge permit with the California Department of Water. They're not doing any of that. And all these regulations and all these taxes that, by the way, are well over 40% now in taxes, and that by definition is slavery. So they have handicapped us in this market, and that market will bolster, what they've done will bolster the black market.
So they still haven't made it. They still haven't made it easy enough for the black market to go away.
Because they regulation and regulations to horn out the small farmer.
Do you think that craft cannabis will survive?
Only if we adopt the same things that were adopted by, like, the coffee growers. We need fair trade cannabis. So we need something that's like the fair trade label in cannabis. There's plenty of us that, when given the choice, and I see it, you know, when you go into some of these dispensaries, we have things like Clean Green Certified, you know,
Yep.
a third-party certification company that says, hey, this was grown in an ecologically friendly fashion. And I and other growers, when I was still a grower, we used that to stay in our market, because when given the opportunity, many people will say, no, I'm not going to buy. When the organic certified, or, you know, we had to call it clean green, is available, we can still outcompete. When it's not available, that's when we can't outcompete. When they won't allow us to call our product organically farmed, when they won't allow us to call our, you know, let people know that it came from a regenerative farm or from a probiotic farm, that's when they tie our hands.
You've judged Emerald Cup. Their focus is on naturally grown cannabis.
Yeah, that's spotlight.
Yeah, and from what I gather from your knowledge, Alan, is that the winners always have a high Brix rating, a really high nutrient level density, which is impossible to get when you use bottled nutrients. Isn't that correct, Alan?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
You know, why do my mates still use these fancy bottles?
Because they've been tricked through marketing. You know, so much money has been spent in the marketing. Yeah, they were just tricked through marketing, like so many of us, you know.
Right.
They make those products and everything look so slick in a magazine like High Times. But the problem with that is, you know, we can grow great looking plants covered in THC. That's not a problem with these synthetic fertilizers. But they're substandard in quality, and that doesn't come across in a magazine picture. These kids are reading these magazines and thinking that they're getting an education. It's like, oh, you did an article, but magically, 3 pages after that article, there's that product for sale. Okay, how do I say this? Just like most of our friends probably will never order kimchi, there's a cultural impasse. They don't understand it. They weren't brought up with it. They don't understand Bokashi because, for the same reason, they don't understand kimchi or why it's popular. So we had to change it. You know, we had to get our customers, most of us, unfortunately, most of us, you know, in the industry are of European heritage. And so we had to get them to think about it like it being like the leftovers from when your ancestors made beer that was probiotic, or if they made kvass that was obviously probiotic, any of the lactic acid bacteria beverages. Our ancestors would have put that back into the compost pile because there was no trash service, you know, so that's where it would have went. So they were automatically putting it in there. And I thought, well, I know a lot of my grower friends, they always kind of want to pour a bit of IPA or their beer onto a plant even. And I thought, well, that's how I get their attention. Show them why it was wise that their ancestors were doing, in effect, what they want to do now. Because they were taking the dregs from those fermentations and introducing those microbes right back into the garden. We got so many bright-eyed kids right now. They want to go and spend 15 grand at a permaculture school, and they don't even understand that their own ancestors already had permaculture, or they wouldn't be here. So let's give credit to our ancestors who were far brighter intellectually than a lot of us today are. You know, let's not think that they were just a bunch of bumbling idiots, because they had answers to the problems that we have today.
Yeah, I see a similarity between, you know, Rudolf Steiner's approach and what you're doing, man.
My lineage is like French-Austrian, out of southern Germany. My people were basically Mennonite-type farmers from that area, and they took up, and they were warriors, you know, and they took up and went up to Russia and settled around Moscow. And one of my great grandfathers, he helped to, he was on a board of governors who helped to bring what was called Stolpen agrarian reform to Russia. And so my family were at the original talks that Rudolf Steiner put on at the different counts houses, you know. They were there. Basically, Rudolf Steiner went around and checked out all the top operating farms and put together, you know, a little list of, hey, this is what these people are doing and why. This is what this one is doing and why. So he did it was how to, you know. And so a lot of those practices that were used by Steiner and families in Germany don't think there wasn't a network all the way up to Moscow. You know what I mean? They were using the same farming technologies up in Russia.
Right, and that's yeah. So you're basically continuing the work of your great grandfather. Is that correct?
You know, it's not just me. If you read into like the background behind Big Mike, you know, at Advanced Nutrients, he's reading through old and having people for him read back through old Russian farming journals. You know, you want to know why he used the sulfur to increase terpene levels? Because he read that using sulfur increased terpene levels. Those edibles, boy, that's my kryptonite. I can't handle hardly any edibles at all. I smoke any of the good herb, but those edibles, man, I don't like looking down on my body from up above. You know, like,
Hey, tell me about the Eddy Lep Tea Party and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon discovery.
Well, I mean, maybe after this interview, I could have Eddy explain the tea ceremony and why they would do it yearly. I hung out with Eddy for years and years, and I never worked for him because I was a boss myself. So I got to hang out with him at a different level, you know. I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. Awesome.
That's my beautiful wife, Leanne. Eddy and I were hanging out one day, and he had this list above his staircase of all these Illuminati families. Are you following me? Because he was of the opinion, I think, and he could set you straight if I'm wrong, but Eddy was of the opinion that all the people in those families were pathogenic, you know. A lot of psychopaths and a lot of world leaders that were pretty evil people were on that poster. And I said, yeah, but Eddy, you and I have been hanging out for over 7 years now. I said, you see that family over there? They're on that list, and you think that they're all, you know, basically a plight, a pathogen on the world. I said, but that's my family. And I said, I think you need to look at these families the same way you look at the microbes that you're made up of. 90% of the microbes that you're made up of are opportunistic. 5% roughly of the microbes that you're made up of are probiotic. And 5% of the microbes that you're made up of are pathogenic. Now, the 90% of the microbes that you're made up of, the opportunistic ones, they work with whichever 5% is currently out competing. So it's not fair to say that every Rothschild is addicted. 5% of them are going to be damn straight up good people and sterling. They just don't get hired within their own family to go be the manager at one of the financial funds. Because you got to be kind of psychopathic to run those financial funds and be involved with a lot of this venture capital. So then Eddy said, well, if that's your family, why don't you come back over in a few days and spend the night with me? We're going to do our yearly mushroom ceremony. And he said, let's see what we can wring out of you. That if you're going to go meet a powerful person that you want to be your mentor or a leader, that you go with a question that they would want to answer, an icebreaker. And so for a week, when I knew I was going to do this mushroom ceremony thing, I kept trying to come up with a great question. And so I was talking with my brother before I went to Eddy's to do the mushroom ceremony that night, and he was showing me these earth boxes. He was using them before me.
Yeah.
He said, Alan, he's pretty intuitive, you know, And he said, man, I think this technology here has something to do with the Hanging Gardens of Babylon technology. And that rang in my ears. And so that night when I went and I did the mushroom ceremony, before I laid down to go to sleep, I wrote down on a piece of paper next to me, how did the Hanging Gardens of Babylon operate? And when I fell asleep that night, I had a dream, but it wasn't really like a dream, because a dream normally comes, slowly. It was more like a zip drive when you put it in a computer. It just is there, And I'm going to tell you straight, and I'm going to look you straight in the eye and tell you, I had a vision of how it all worked, and how even the grains that they were fermenting were used for the betterment of the people who were fermenting the grains, the soldiers, and how it kept the fluid in the sub-irrigated planter from going stagnant in a pathogenic direction. It changed me. I was never the same person after that night. I think when I finally finished, figured out my mission this time around on this planet is to change the modern paradigm in agriculture and have agriculture heal the planet rather than continue to wound the planet. My mission is just to be a brave leader of other brave leaders. And one thing that I got from the vision, was that we would never get bored with the technology that is sparked from what we're doing right here, right now. There will continue to be young farmers that keep coming forward. And this is like open source probiotics. Do you understand? Don't patent it. Don't occult it. Put it out there and let it spark other people to keep building upon what you have come upon. I don't think there's a chance in hell you get into heaven if you occult all this information that was given to you. If you look up the microbes that we're using in probiotic farming, and then you go over to Google Scholar and you look up a term like in-place medical bioremediation, you'll find these same microbes being used by doctors to cure toxicity buildup in humans. So it's the food that we're eating, and it's the trace minerals and the microbes in the smoke that we're inhaling that helps us to live in symbiosis with these microbes. To put on the whole armor of nature is to live in symbiosis with these probiotic microorganisms. So maybe think about what you're eating and try to feed these microorganisms your shields, at the same time. Do you know the fastest way for a drug to your brain? It's through inhalation. And so I think that the fastest way for these trace minerals and things to your brain also is through inhalation. So cannabis allows me to inhale the prebiotics that I need to sustain the probiotics in my body, especially in my head. I would rather work with the operating system that the planet already had going. Competitive exclusion.
Yeah.
I came to a place where I understood singularity and how what we are lacking in as humans, the soil is also lacking in. Give to the soil what you'd like to have in return from your plant for nutrition. So my wife and I were unable to have children. We kept having problems with genetics. And so I started, through necessity, learning a lot about genetics. And I learned at that point about epigenetics and gene therapy. And then I thought one day, and I typed into Google Scholar plant epigenetics, and it was the same. And the chlorophyll in the plant is almost exactly the same as the blood in a human. And I thought, wow. Well, I mean, what my relatives would have done, my ancestors would have done, is just tried to, if someone had a nutritional deficiency, they would have tried to grow a stellar garden. And they would have made sure that they put the wood ash and things from keeping themselves warm through the winter back onto the garden, because they understood if you don't do that, how do you think you can keep taking year after year from the soil and it not deplete the soil? They saw it with their own eyes, and they saw, okay, we'll put the wood ash full of trace minerals, back onto the soil, and then we can grow fruits and vegetables again just like before. You know, they saw, you know, they knew that forests burnt down and there was a cycle of life and the ash went back into the soil. And so I just started treating the soil nutritionally as if it was a person, you know, and I saw the plants just perk right up. And I was studying Dave Asprey and his book, The Better Baby Book. And I thought, wow, we ought to do something like the Better Garden Book, you know, and we can translate all this over into the plant world, you know, that comes from the human world.
Explain the logical fallacy and why do you implement it into your Probiotic Farmers Alliance group?
So I thought about creating this group, and I thought, if you're going to create a group, you should create the group with 3 hot topics, right? And then you got a winning concept, right? One concept, very popular, cannabis, right? Another hot topic, ancestry, right? Ancestry.com. Another hot topic that I was into at that point and still am, critical thinking. So that's why at the PFA, there's 3 things we talk about. We talk about ancestry, we talk about cannabis, and we talk about critical thinking. One problem with other forums and pages is that, you know, you're going to have people that come in and they just shoot their mouth off. And they're a sociopath and they cannot share the spotlight. And so, as a shield against them, we brought in critical thinking and the logical fallacies. So that when that sociopath or that highly intelligent psychopath comes into our midst, it's like a guillotine. They use those logical fallacies so often, they'll just go put their head in there. That is how most of the best educators would shut up, you know, the problem maker. Call them out on their fallacies. I mean, we are using peer pressure for our own gain. You are the sum total of the 5 people that you hang out the most with. But your brain doesn't know when you're listening to a podcast that, or an audiobook, that you're not hanging out with that person. So I do a whole lot of hanging out with people that are so intelligent they scare the shit out of me. I don't know how it happens, but if you write down a plan and if you keep on that heading and you stay, somehow that intention can manifest into reality. And I say that because I've done things and I've called shots in my journals, like the land I'm on right now has 2 running water sources, and I have 100% in writing and have proven it, water rights to all the water on my land. And way before I moved to Mendocino, in my journals, when I was writing what I would want from a farm, I wrote that down. 2 running water sources and water rights. And I found it, or it found me. And that's just one for instance. And so I think it's very important that people keep a journal. And I think it's it will keep you on the same heading. You know, keep your intention where you want to go. You know, if you're a race car driver and you go into a slide, don't just look at that pole. If you do, you're going to hit that pole. Keep your intention where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. Because where you're at in your mind, that's where you live. You know, I don't want to be afraid every day of the feds coming and busting down my gates again and pointing M14 rifles at me, because I think I could probably make that happen again if I'm always worried about that. You know what I learned fairly quickly? I learned fairly quickly that I can't take my dogs to the creeks around here at some times of the year because the blue-green algae is poisonous and will kill my animal. And I learned fairly quickly that the wastewater treatment center up in Garberville and in, you know, areas in Humboldt was not even working anymore because so many fertilizers were being poured into the sewer system and were getting into our rivers. And so it was my love of the animals and seeing them die from the pollution in the creeks that had the greatest impact on me. you know. When I saw what was happening to our rivers and everything here, and especially after my vision, there was just no way that I could return back. You know, because I'm not going to lie to you, you know, I've used a lot of general hydroponics, plant foods, you know, for a lot of years. And people would, I'm very good at my flush game and all that. And so people, they thought it was organic. You know, I could fool most people if I wanted, but I can't fool these fish in the creek over here. And what right do I have to pollute their home? To what? So I could have big tires and a big bumper on my fancy diesel truck? No. I'm pretty sure I'm here to pass a test or fail a test. And if I was to continue on that route, how I can't pass this test, you know, and move on to whatever the next plane of reality is. Like, how are you going to do that? Be a mass polluter, you know? That's not for me. And plus, you know, I learned to farm from my grandmother, and she never put no beastie blooms on nothing. And, you know, she taught me Cherokee mound farming and things like that, and how to use the spongy limbs that had fallen off of the trees, certain trees, you know, to create kind of a hugelkultur mound. And my grandma never used any of those fertilizers, and she grew the best tobacco, and she grew the best comfrey. I couldn't duplicate with even an awesome indoor grow room the type of tobacco or comfrey that she grew.
You've got 4 key components to your Gro-Kashi motto, if I'm correct. It's wisdom, love, gratitude, and grace. Can you talk to me about those?
And I think these microbes, if I had to give a word to Streptomyces, I think maybe it's wisdom. And if I had to give a word to yeast, it might be gratitude. And if I had to give a word to purple non-sulfur bacteria, you know, photosynthetic bacteria that control photosynthesis, I probably would give that one grace. And the lactic acid bacteria, you know, when a child is born, the mother is given oxytocin naturally, and that makes her love the baby. What makes the baby love her? I think it's the lacto. And so I gave the word love to the lacto. So that's the microbial consortium that I love the most. You know, it's like EM, and I think from EM can come wisdom, love, gratitude, and grace.
That's beautiful, man. That's really cool.
When I found this piece of land, it was being used as a trash dump. It was bare land, and we took a bunch of trash out of it, and we found some different oddities on the land, you know, big piles of stones and things. And I was a coach for Pee Wee well, now it's Sheriff's Athletic League. And so when I was coaching one day, I was talking with some of the elders from our local Native community, and they said they thought they knew what it was, but they also did a land clearing business. So I said, well, come out with me one day. You know, let's look at this place. I'm cleaning it up. Tell me about this place. And they came out, and they recognized what the stone stacks were for and everything. And we just began talking about the products and what I do too. And so I have a pretty good relationship with our local natives here, because I think it's because, you know, like they told me, you know, our culture has a word, and I can't remember the word, God, I'm sorry, but they said we have a word for traveling wise men. You know, you don't kill them. You know what I mean? You try to get information from travelers that display some wisdom. And so they said, don't think that, you know, all of our tribes were all about just, you know, warring and killing people when they came along. That just simply wasn't the truth, you know. And so I got their blessings, and, you know, they helped me with some of the land clearing and some of the trash cleanup, and I just try to get along, you know. There are properties around here where my friends have had some of the famous farmers that you're talking about, but they would have like nightmares, you know, of like natives coming to kill them in their sleep and things like that. And we found that, you know, a product like Gro-Kashi, you can do a lot worse than to go around your property and bless up the bigger trees and ask the trees to let any spirits that are restless, have the tree let the natives have, or let the spirits know that you're beneficial, and peace will come onto that land. I gotta tell you, I feel more like that guy from Idiocracy. Yeah, you know the movie Idiocracy, where the one guy, he's just like the plainest guy imaginable, and he's put into a time capsule, and he comes back, and he just has an answer for agriculture because they're feeding the plants Gatorade and shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you might try putting water on the plant, you know, rather than Gatorade. But the society has deteriorated to such a point that they don't even understand why a plant would want water. Isn't this all just really common sense? Like, when you hear it, doesn't it sink in and go, you know what? Gee, that is what my ancestors did. What? I should probably just go back doing what my ancestors did. Maybe I should eat what my great-grandparents ate. You know what I mean? And steer clear of this plastic cheese and shit that they offer us. And I ask this question at every scientific panel that I put on, so you may be familiar. But I want to ask you, when it comes to cannabis and the culture, what is your pet peeve? What is it that sticks with you that makes you say, you know what, why in the hell don't these people get this one point right here? What is that point for you?
The way in which we conduct ourselves, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, but the way we conduct ourselves with the overconsumption of cannabis.
What it sparks to me is a memory of a conversation that I had years and years ago before Jack Hara died, with him and Eddy. And we said, here's the problem, okay? The cannabis market is basically, I hate to say this, but we said it was an idiot-driven market. And the reason we said this is because everyone was wanting this purple weed and these different weeds that were really strong, right? That traditionally we would have made that into hash. And the hash is what you would smoke at night to go to sleep, right?
Mm.
And we had our high CBDs, what we called sativas, right? That those things make you alert, get you up, and make you want to go out and do work and do things, you know? And we're smoking this heavy duty stuff during the day. And it's disempowering us as a species. And I think that the reason why you had so many government agencies that were dubious involved in cannabis and all these other drugs is because they take a good thing and they bastardize it to disempower us. All of these entheogens, the mushrooms, the ayahuasca, all the things that we're talking about, the government and the venture capital people, whoever these people are, they put out and they mass market a version of what we like that's really not good for us. You know, they sell you mushrooms, but they want you to grow the mushroom in a sterile environment. They sell you this cannabis, but they want you to grow it with their synthetic fertilizers. They sell you all these things that we like, but what they're cutting out of it is nature. All the entheogens have one thing in common: streptomyces and different probiotics. So the THC, it still gets you high, but you didn't get the other part of the high. You didn't get the spiritual part of the high. You didn't get the things that may or may not have gone into your body and helped to create new neural passageways. You know, we post things about how things like bacterial streptomyces are set off and go into an exploration mode when they come in contact with fungus. So maybe when we had the mushroom originally, you know, a natural grown mushroom, then the streptomyces went into bioremediate it, and we had those temporary neural connections from the mycelium from the streptomyces. We see it grow underwater. We see different pathogenic forms of streptomyces in the medical world, even in the brain cavity. Why can't there be the probiotic, species of the streptomyces in the brain cavity, creating neural pathways? I go to brain power conferences put on by the United Nations, and I've been lucky enough to have been given scholarship. And I talk to the top scientists in the world, and they say, absolutely, the quality of the food that you eat has everything to do with your cognitive fitness.
Alan, what's your pet peeve about the cannabis community?
I don't think that they know that a good portion of them are mass polluters. So I want to point out and use peer pressure to change the situation, because a lot of these guys won't change unless we shame them. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And so we need to point out how their use of synthetic fertilizers is in no way fair trade with nature. Do what I've done. Go to your local club, point to the counter and say, you see that? That's my farm. I've held the highest price point for 2 years with that.
Yep.
You want to compete with me? You better catch up. You're growing mint. It is competitive exclusion. They are your friends, I'm sorry, but they're opportunistic and they're part of the 90%. You have to outcompete the pathogenic ones so that the opportunistic ones will follow you. When you go up against that grower who thinks that he's got the best, put your joint in his mouth. Okay, listen, if you and I were hanging out with a bunch of wine snobs, that's one crowd. But in the cannabis world, I don't care if I'm standing there with Eddy Lep, and I'm standing there with Ed Rosenthal, and I'm standing there with Kyle Cushman, and I'm standing there with all top friends, right? If a new kid that none of us knows walks up and he has the bomb, we're all going to go, holy cow, kid, what are you doing? We're not the wine snob. That's what's different in cannabis. The truth is smoke.
The truth is in the smoke. I love it, Alan. And, dude, I could talk to you all day. I think you're on a really good thing here. I think it's definitely one of many answers to how to save the planet from ourselves. And you're definitely on your way to, and I firmly believe you've accomplished it, but you're going to leave a wonderful legacy, Alan. You definitely have left.
We just have started.
Yeah. It's an exciting time to be alive, man. And I thank you again for giving me your time. Regardless of cannabis's standing worldwide, man, thanks for your courage, dude, and doing what you've done.
Thank you, man. And cheers from Mendocino.
Well, that went really well. What an amazing dude. What a deep, insightful... What an amazing dude.